You're watching FRCD on CAN TV. Family Resource Center on Disabilities is the Region 1 Parent Training and Information Center in Illinois. You can reach us at 312-939-3513. You can also visit us at www.frcd.org or email us at info@frcd.org. Family Resource Center on Disabilities serves the following counties: McHenry, Lake, Kane, DuPage, Cook, Kendall, Will, and Grundy. You can also follow Family Resource Center on Disabilities on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter at FRCDPTI, and on YouTube at FRCD1231. Thank you for joining FRCD on CAN TV. I'm your host, Paula Wills. And here we discuss special education, parent advocacy, and resources for families of children with disabilities. And today we're discussing placement. Often in special education, you hear terms of my child's in special ed, my child is in a self-contained classroom. Sometimes my child has to go to the special education room. But what does that really mean? So when we talk about placement, people automatically assume a place. But special education is not a place. It is a list of services. And basically, when your IEP is formed, or depending on what may occur or we learn about the student, we try to determine where is the most appropriate place to deliver those services. So today we're going to break that down as what do we mean by placement and what do we mean by least restrictive environment. So when we talk about least restrictive environment, this is what IDEA says. IDEA requires that to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities, including children in public or private institutions or other facilities, are educated with children who are not disabled. Special education is not a place. It is a set of services. So, when we're talking about educating students, the idea is that students, as much as possible, are educated among children who do not have disabilities or are in the general education setting. Because there is only one curriculum, the general education curriculum, and what special education does is it provides access to that general curriculum. And whenever possible, whenever it's appropriate, students should be educated with their students who are in the general education classroom. So that's how we come up with least restrictive environment. So when we talk about, so sometimes when you may get your child's first IEP, at that domain meeting, they just talk about the list of services that your child's available to your child. The term placement comes up, and when they are developing the placement of where your child is going to be educated, they're going to be looking at the most least restrictive environment. So to talk about least restrictive environment, this is what we mean. Now, this is a small, I'll read through this because I do recognize that the writing's a bit small. But so what is the least restrictive environment? The general education classroom with no supplementary aids or services. So what does that mean? That means the student is in the classroom. They do not have a dedicated aid or any additional supports. They go to school. That is the least restrictive environment, also known as the general education classroom, or general education. I guess you can call it space. So at this point, they have There are no aides that are brought in, to provide additional support. The student is not leaving the classroom for any type of additional help. The student is just in the classroom. So that's the least restrictive environment. So now we go to where things start to get a little more restrictive. So general education with supplementary aids and services. So that's the second line. So what do we mean? Now we're going to bring in, you may get, not necessarily a dedicated aid, but there might be an aid that's going to come and help the student in certain areas in their academia. There may be, the teacher might take out a little more extra time. There might be some changes to the curriculum. So we're still inside the general education classroom as far as the setting, but you're receiving services. Services are being brought into that setting. So that's what we mean. So now we're a little more restricted, but you're still in the general education classroom. Now, the third line, we say resource support placement in the special education classroom with less than 40% of the school day. So what do we mean by that? We're talking about now the student might be in the classroom about like 60% of the day, and maybe for English, that student may go to a resource room to receive, depending on what their disability is, what type of services they need. They may go to a different classroom. They may leave for a different classroom to get that service, and then they would return to the general classroom, if that's how their day might look. So that's what we're talking about when we're on that third tier of least restrictive environment. So things are getting a little more restrictive where they're not necessarily in that classroom full time, but at this point they're still in the classroom at least 60% of the time. So now we go to the fourth tier where we talk about self-contained placement. Placement in a special education classroom more than 40% of the school day. So now you're looking at maybe where the student might be spending the majority of the day in a special education classroom with more students who are disabled. They might have similar disabilities. They may need more support. But at this point, they're receiving services in a classroom that will support students with disabilities more so than what they could receive in the general education classroom. So in that case, and often that's called a self-contained placement. So it's a self-contained classroom. Where they still have access to the general education curriculum, but they're receiving supports in that classroom, and so that way, and that's because it's more appropriate for that student to be in that space, so that they can access the appropriate modifications and accommodations can be delivered, so that the student can access the general curriculum, which they would not possibly be able to do if they were in the general education classroom. So then we're going to move down to the let's see, I think we're on the fifth tier. Yes, we are on the fifth tier. So we are talking about separate special education day school. So in this incident, we're talking about the student is in a completely different school setting. So they're not moving from a general education classroom to maybe a classroom that provides support to students with special needs. They are in a completely different school where the whole school are students who have disabilities that might be similar, or they need more support to access the general education curriculum. So, and then we call that, you might have heard of like a day school, like something a school that just pops up out of my head is like Northside Learning Center, which is like is a day school. So the parent, I mean the student, would spend all day, in that classroom. All their service would be delivered there. And sometimes they refer to it as a therapeutic school or a day school, but it comes down to what's appropriate. In that case, the curriculum may be more modified. And again, it also depends on what the disability is, because for some schools there might be a focus on developmental delay. There may be a focus on mental health. There are some schools that might be focused on learning disabilities. There are students who may have severe to profound learning disabilities, and that school is the appropriate setting where the student can receive their free, appropriate public education in that setting. So, depending on what the disability is or disabilities are. It might be more appropriate for a student to be in a school like a day school or a therapeutic environment. So we have come to the 2, 3, 4, 5th. So now we're going to the 6th level, where we're getting to the most restrictive environment. So as you can see, as we go down the triangle, down the tier, we are looking at where it kind of gets a little bit smaller, but you're seeing where it's most restrictive. So now we talk about residential placement. So at this point, what does this scene look like? So it means the school is being educated. Maybe they might be educated, they're outside of the home. They might be living in where they're educated at. If that's the best, I'm trying to think that's the best way to say that. They are so the student is living away from home, and they might be in a therapeutic environment, and where they are receiving their services at that place. So they live, eat there, and then they attend school, and their IEP is surrounded. They're still able to access the general education curriculum. However, it is more appropriate that they live away from home, and that they receive their services at the facility. So that could look a number of different ways, and it's for a number of different reasons. It depends on the disability. Sometimes it's best for students to be in a therapeutic environment 24/7. So for that, we have residential placement. And then we come to our most restrictive environment. Home placement or a hospital setting. Sometimes you have students who have disabilities that are medical, or they might have other types of disabilities where it's very difficult for them to leave the home or leave the hospital. There's a number of reasons why a student would may be educated at home or in a hospital. We often at FRCD, I know we call it homebound services, where the services, the school district, someone comes to the hospital, a teacher comes to the hospital or to the home, and delivers those services. So for the student, they're not going into the classroom, and as I say, it could be for a number of different reasons. It could be it could be a series of medical issues. It could be a series of, it might be mental health issues. A number of reasons as to why a student may receive homebound services. Or hospital services. I think kind of like when we hear hospital, it kind of, speaks for itself. They're not able to leave, but they are still entitled to a free, appropriate public education. So so again, going back to our triangle, our tier, we also state that the reasons must be due to the needs of the child and not the convenience of others. But this tier is this is kind of like how we describe what the least restrictive environment. We start off, as you see, we started off with the least restrictive. That's probably the widest tier, where again you have the general education students, and then we go to where is homebound hospital placement. It is not, where you don't have as many students receiving that type of service. But things that we want to kind of talk about when we're addressing placement is, I think one of the most important things that we definitely need to address is, you want to make sure as your child is going through the education, their academic career, is their label appropriate? Is the placement appropriate? Is the student in a general education classroom and maybe they're getting supports brought in, but maybe it's not enough. The student is still falling behind, or they're not able to focus. And in that sense, if that is happening, they're not accessing the general curriculum. They're not receiving FAPE, which, again, is their free, appropriate public education. So that's why understanding placement is so important. Often when we think of placement, we think of special education. Well, I don't know. As I said, we're approaching a new generation. So, but in the past, when people thought of special education, they also often thought of a place. They, and the label, not so much of what the child's actual disability was, but more of like the stigma and label that followed with the having to needing extra support. I'll put it that way. So if a student is disabled and they have to go to a resource center, or they have to go to a school that focuses on the disability, it was looked down upon, and sometimes parents are a little concerned when they find out that oh, my child needs special education services, and they automatically think about that classroom, in the boiler room, which was a common story you'll hear, especially when you think back, when you hear about the earlier days of special education, where they had a special needs classroom and it was in a basement or someplace dark, someplace hidden away. So that's often a concern when a family learns that their child need special education services, or they have a disability. They automatically think about discrimination, and they think about special education being a place. So the purpose of breaking down placement and the least restrictive environment is to help families understand that there are very tiers and facets to special education, and it really is supposed to be about the student. Students who are receiving special education services have an IEP, formerly known as the Individual Education Program. And that program is a legal binding document that is designed for your child to access the curriculum to ensure that they have a free, appropriate public education. So when we think about placement, that is all in there. So where they're supposed to receive services, where their strengths, we learn, in that IEP we should see what their strengths are, where, how are they struggling, what's preventing them from accessing the general curriculum, what are the goals to get them as close to operating where they can access the general curriculum as much as possible. So there's a number of things in that document, but one of the things in the document is placement. And it doesn't necessarily, so sometimes when, families sometimes hear it's like, oh, okay, my child's going to be in that classroom, and not to say that the classroom is a bad place. Sometimes that's what's appropriate, for the time, if they can receive the services, because ideally your child is preparing for the future. You're preparing to be continued learners. So would you rather your child is drowning in a general education classroom where they don't know what's going on, they can't keep up, they may be constantly failing, or they're constantly in a state of anxiety, and a number of things that's preventing them from actually accessing the curriculum that is supposed to help them grow? Or would you rather your child be in a situation where they can learn, thrive, see who they are as a student, as a human being, and access the studies and education that they're entitled to? Because the thing about IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is once your child graduates, takes that diploma, or turns 22, that's it, as far as the entitlement of a free, appropriate public education. Now, it's not it for life. I mean, there's things that your child will go on to be able to do, and it could look a number of different ways. But as far as where they have a dedicated IEP team, where they can kind of learn and explore and figure out how they learn with the support of an entire team, that part ends when they turn 22 or they graduate from high school. So we at FRCD always say is, the earlier you start, the better. So for example, if you have a child who is struggling in the classroom, sometimes you might hear teachers or possibly administrators say, and it's fair to say this, we'll give him time. He's having a little trouble here. We're trying to work on this. Or one of our, sarcastically speaking, one of our favorites is, oh, he's just lazy. Don't necessarily just take that. Just okay. Well, what should we do? Should we wait another year? Should we wait another 2 years? Should I push him harder? Maybe should I take away the whatever incentive that they might have, or I wouldn't necessarily let's go with that alone. Maybe one of the things is you may want to look at getting an evaluation. At FRCD, we do a number of trainings on various components of special education. One of those components is the evaluation process, where if a student, if you suspect that they may need special education services or they're struggling in a particular area, a family can request that their student be evaluated for special, to see if they qualify for special education services. And even if, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the student will qualify. It doesn't, just by going through the process of getting the school to agree to do the evaluation and then going through the 60-day process of actually receiving an evaluation, doesn't necessarily mean that your student will need special education services. But it will also help to determine if there's something else going on there. What is preventing the student from accessing the general curriculum? What's preventing them? Why are they continuing to fail in math or continuing to fail in reading? Or if there's a communication issue, there's a number of things that the evaluation process looks at. It's not just one tool that is used to measure, how your child is performing. So, at Family Resource Center on Disabilities, one of the things that we do is we have a list of, so we train on a number of topics to help families understand what their rights are, the special education process. So we have a training that we call 6 Principles of IDEA. So in that training, we do talk about the Section 504 plan. We'd have a training called Navigating the IEP process, and that focuses on the IEP, the Individualized Education Program. We discuss skills for effective parent advocacy. So sometimes you may not know how to approach the subject with the school, or maybe your child already has an IEP, and you're at the IEP meeting and you're just sitting there and you're not exactly sure what is your role in that IEP meeting. Should I speak up? What do I know enough? That particular training, the Skills for Effective Parent Advocacy training, is designed to help parents feel confident about asking questions, speaking up, how to look for information about the process. So, all of our trainings are designed to empower parents to be a part of the special education process. That one in particular discusses the communication piece and how to effectively work with the school, so that you don't burn years and years going back and forth with a common one we have is going back and forth with the bus driver regarding transportation, when it might be the case manager or the principal or a person, a decision maker on the IEP team. So that's what that particular training focuses on. We also offer transition to post-secondary and transition to adulthood. So those kind of go together. And the way that one particularly works, we have actually done a couple of shows about the transition process, but the transition process focuses on students who are getting to that point where they're ready to age out. So like in Illinois, the transition age is 14 and a half, so kind of like around freshman year. And in that process, what the student there will be a component added to their IEP called transition. So they're going to start looking at, what does your child want to do when they finish high school? Do they want to? Are they going to go off to college? Are they going to work? Maybe they might be part of a adult day program. Again, it really depends on the student. And what they in the transition portion of the IEP, they're going to look at where do we want to see the student in like 4 years, maybe 5 years, depending on when the student will take their diploma. So some students, they may graduate on their senior year, which is the 4 years. Some students may go all the way to 22. Well, that will also be recorded in the IEP. So that's so when we're talking, so there's a number of aspects to the IEP, and this is why the appropriate placement, the appropriate IEP should, overall is very important. But we definitely wanted to focus on that placement piece, because ideally you want to know what, you're always going to be preparing for when your student or when your child completes high school and is ready to go on to the next phase of their life. So if they, spend the first 5 school years, struggling because they're not in the correct placement, then it sets the student back. So that's one of the reasons why we like to make it clear to families what we mean by placement and what you should understand about it, so that you can make a decision, and also determine that when you're at the IEP meeting, especially if it's like the first initial one, if that's a question that needs to come up, is this the appropriate placement? And then there's the flip side to that. There's also a flip side to that where if the student has they might be in a placement that's not appropriate. So they might be in a day school setting, and and that might be too restrictive for them. So like it's not so they're still not they might be acing everything. They're doing great in all their classes, doing well, and the thing is, but they're not making meaningful progress because one of the reasons being is the work may not be challenging, it may not be the right placement. So there's a lot of reasons why that could happen, but placement as being a part of the IEP can also play a role in that. So that student who might be in that day program or who might be in the special education classroom, maybe all they really need is to be in a general education classroom with supports brought in. Or maybe they only need to go to that special education classroom or resource room for maybe 2 subjects. So it's a number of things. Or maybe they might need another type of support or tool. So there's a number of things that come up where a number of things that may happen or come up that you want to be looking out for, or noticing when you notice that your child is struggling, or you might even notice various behaviors or things. So in a nutshell, we often say when you're looking at your child's IEP, or if your child's getting special education services for the first time, it's good to ask questions about placement, and don't necessarily judge that this is necessarily a bad reflection on your child's ability to learn. Basically, all this is to help make sure that your child is in a process where they can appropriately grasp the materials and grow. But if you're stuck in a situation where you don't even understand what's going on, how are you going to grow from that? Except the only thing that will most likely happen is the student will become more frustrated and disconnected from the classroom and the general curriculum, which is what we're trying to access. So with that being said, I also wanted to just add that you can learn more about placement in the Illinois Parent Guide at isb.net. They have a parent guide there that discusses all the aspects of special education services. So that's www.isbe.net. Or you can also visit our website, and we also have a copy of that book broken down chapter by chapter. So in this point, this concludes our episode today on placement. That concludes today's episode. And if at any point you guys have questions about our services, or you have questions about your child's IEP, please don't hesitate to contact us at Family Resource Center on Disabilities. You can call our main number at 312-939-3513. You can also email us at info@frcd.org and visit our website, where you can learn about our various trainings and webinars that we offer on the special education process. Again, my name is Paula Wills. This is FRCD on CAN TV, where we discuss special education, parent advocacy, and resources for families of children with disabilities. Thank you for tuning in, and have a wonderful week.